Imagine this. You're standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind biting your skin, your heart racing in your chest. Below you, a vast, endless abyss, deep down. That stepping off the edge into the unknown could change your life. It could offer the breakthrough, the growth, the transformation you've been longing for. Yet, despite the pull of possibility, you hesitate. You turn away from the precipice and walk back to safety. The comfort of familiarity, of staying within your limits, feels less risky, less painful. But in that moment of retreat, a decision is made. You've chosen the easy way out, the path of least resistance, and in doing so, you've also chosen your fate. You've chosen to stay the same, to avoid confronting the fear that lurked at the edge of that cliff. This is how most of us live, avoiding discomfort, running from pain, seeking a life free of challenges, trials, or unpleasant truths. And yet, the more we avoid, the more we ensure that the life we could have had slips further out of reach. Nietzsche once said, "The greatest weight is the weight of the greatest possible being." What he meant was that in order to grow, to become the person you are capable of being, you must confront discomfort. Pain, in its many forms, is the cost of that growth. It is the crucible through which transformation occurs. The longer you avoid it, the longer you remain stagnant. But there is a profound irony in this. The very pain we try to escape from becomes the force that shapes us. The more we run from it, the more it controls us. Jung would argue that this is precisely the nature of the shadow, the unconscious part of ourselves, that we reject, ignore, or suppress. In doing so, we fail to integrate it into our lives, and the shadow grows stronger, more controlling, and more destructive. It is only by facing the pain, the shadow, that we can reclaim control over our lives. This tension between the desire to avoid pain and the necessity of confronting it is at the heart of the human condition. We are constantly presented with the choice: face the discomfort, or let it fester and shape our destiny in ways we cannot control. The truth is, the pain you avoid becomes your fate, and by choosing to sidestep it, you make the choice to live a life of limitation, fear, and missed potential. But what if we stop running? What if we embrace that pain? Could it be the key to unlocking a life of purpose, of strength, of freedom? This is the question we must grapple with as we explore the hidden forces behind our decisions to avoid pain and what those decisions ultimately cost us. So, as we begin this journey together, take a moment to reflect. Where in your life have you avoided the pain? Where have you turned away from the edge, opting for comfort and safety instead? And what might that avoidance be costing you, both in the short term and in the long run? The illusion of escaping pain is powerful, but it is also a trap. And as we will see, the price of that illusion is often far higher than we ever realize. Pain, in its many forms, has always held a central place in human history, not merely as a biological or emotional experience, but as a profound philosophical and psychological concept. To understand our modern relationship with pain, we must first journey through the ages, exploring how ancient philosophers, psychologists, and thinkers across time have grappled with its meaning and implications. In the ancient world, philosophers sought truth not as a mere academic pursuit, but as a process of self-discovery, often painful, difficult, and unsettling. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, embodied this principle. For Socrates, the search for truth was inexorably tied to discomfort and disillusionment. He believed that only by confronting uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world could we approach a deeper understanding. The unexamined life is not worth living, he famously declared, urging his followers to question their assumptions and confront the unsettling aspects of their own existence. For Socrates, to avoid the pain of self-reflection was to live a life of ignorance, a fate far worse than the agony of self-awareness. This mindset was not unique to Socrates. In the wake of Socratic thought, philosophers across ancient Greece and Rome explored the role of pain in shaping character and virtue. The Stoics, for instance, viewed suffering as an inevitable part of life, a challenge to be met with strength and resilience. Epictetus, one of the Stoic philosophers, argued that we cannot control the external events that cause us pain, but we can control our reactions to them. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. He wrote, emphasizing the importance of accepting suffering as part of the human experience. For the Stoics, pain was not something to be feared or avoided, but something to be transcended through wisdom, virtue, and the strength of the will. The Stoic outlook on pain continued to influence Western thought for centuries, but it was in the 19th century, with the rise of existentialism, that pain would once again take center stage in a radical new way. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, made perhaps the most forceful and provocative claim about pain's role in human life. Suffering is not merely a consequence of existence. It is the very force that drives us toward greatness. Nietzsche's philosophy of the will to power asserted that human beings are not defined by their suffering, but rather by how they respond to it. It is through the pain of struggle, hardship, and conflict that we find the potential for growth and self-overcoming. Nietzsche's famous declaration, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," encapsulates this view that pain is not an obstacle to be avoided, but a force that can shape and define the individual's journey toward power and meaning. For Nietzsche, this understanding of pain was deeply intertwined with his critique of traditional moralities. He saw the Christian emphasis on suffering and sacrifice as a form of denial of the body, the instincts, and the vitality of life itself. Christianity, Nietzsche argued, had created a slave morality that glorified suffering and submission, teaching people to accept pain passively as part of their moral duty. In contrast, Nietzsche championed the idea of amor fati, the love of one's fate. This was not mere acceptance of suffering, but an active embrace of life's challenges, seeing pain not as an enemy, but as an essential part of one's personal and philosophical journey. As the Western world transitioned into the 20th century, a new wave of psychological thought began to reshape our understanding of pain, particularly through the work of Carl Jung. While Nietzsche had focused on the existential aspects of suffering, Jung introduced a psychological dimension to the conversation. Jung's exploration of the unconscious mind and his concept of the shadow brought a new layer of complexity to the role of pain in human life. For Jung, pain was not simply an external experience to be faced head-on, but an internal force, a product of the repressed, unacknowledged parts of the self. The shadow, as Jung called it, represented those aspects of the personality that one has rejected or failed to integrate, traits or emotions deemed unacceptable, undesirable, or too painful to confront. The avoidance of pain, Jung argued, was a denial of the self. By suppressing the shadow, individuals fail to recognize the full complexity of their own nature, leading to internal conflict, neurosis, and a fractured sense of identity. Pain, in this context, becomes not just an emotional or physical experience, but a necessary catalyst for psychological integration. To confront the shadow and accept the pain it brings is to begin the process of individuation, the journey toward wholeness and self-realization. Jung believed that only by integrating these hidden parts of the self could an individual achieve psychological health and find true meaning in life. Pain, therefore, becomes an essential part of the healing process, a path to greater authenticity and self-knowledge. In the modern era, our relationship with pain has evolved in fascinating and often troubling ways. We live in a culture that constantly seeks to avoid pain, whether through distractions, addictions, or the pursuit of pleasure. We have medicalized suffering, turning it into something to be eradicated rather than understood. Yet, despite our technological advancements and cultural insistence on comfort, the underlying truths of pain remain with us. From ancient Greece to modern psychology, thinkers have consistently argued that pain, far from being something to fear, is integral to the human experience. It is through pain that we grow, learn, and ultimately come to understand the world and ourselves more deeply. As we explore the evolution of pain in philosophy and psychology, we begin to see that the avoidance of pain may come at a high cost. In seeking to numb or escape it, we may be distancing ourselves from the very aspects of life that offer the greatest potential for growth and transformation. The path of avoiding pain may be one of comfort, but it is also one of stagnation. Pain, as history has taught us, is not something to be feared, but something to be embraced, a vital force that drives us toward greater depth, understanding, and self-realization. This historical journey provides a backdrop for our modern understanding of pain. And as we move forward, we will delve deeper into how the avoidance of pain in contemporary society distorts our path to wholeness and personal power. Just as the ancient philosophers sought truth through painful self-examination, so too must we confront our own discomforts and struggles if we are to find meaning and strength in a world that often seeks to keep us distracted and numbed. The psychology of avoidance. Why we fear pain. Pain, it's one of the most universal human experiences, yet it's also one of the most deeply feared. But why do we fear pain so much? Why do we go to such lengths to avoid it, even when we know it might be essential for our growth and development? To answer this, we must first look at the nature of avoidance itself. At its core, avoidance is a defensive mechanism, a psychological strategy we use to protect ourselves from emotional or physical discomfort. The instinct to avoid pain is so deeply embedded in us that it often feels like a second nature, an automatic reflex in response to anything that feels threatening. But beneath this instinct lies a much more complex and nuanced reality about who we are as human beings. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, understood that pain avoidance is fundamentally tied to the workings of the unconscious mind. According to Freud, much of human behavior is driven by unconscious drives and desires that are too difficult to face consciously. To protect ourselves from the anguish of confronting these desires, we develop defense mechanisms, psychological strategies that distort or deny reality. In order to maintain a sense of emotional safety, for Freud, the ego is the gatekeeper of the self-preservation process. It's the part of the psyche that manages our interactions with the world and mediates between our primal desires, the ID, and the moral constraints of society. The superego. When faced with pain, whether it's emotional, physical, or existential, the ego's instinct is to shield us from it. The result is often an unconscious retreat into denial or repression, mechanisms that allow us to avoid the discomfort of confronting painful truths about ourselves, our pasts, or the world around us. Carl Jung, another towering figure in psychology, took Freud's ideas further by exploring the concept of the shadow, the unconscious part of ourselves that contains everything we reject, deny, or repress. Jung believed that this shadow is not just a place of personal weakness, but also of immense power. He argued that when we avoid confronting the shadow, we not only suppress parts of our psyche, but also limit our potential for personal transformation. The act of avoiding pain, in Jung's view, is not simply about dodging discomfort. It is about avoiding the very aspects of ourselves that could lead to self-actualization. Jung's work sheds light on why we are so resistant to discomfort. It's not just that pain hurts, it's that pain can be a mirror reflection of the parts of ourselves that we would rather not see. It is far easier to build a life of distractions and superficial comforts than to confront the deep, raw truths that lurk within us. This avoidance becomes a protective shield, a barrier against vulnerability, and often it keeps us from ever knowing our true selves. In modern psychology, this avoidance strategy has evolved into what we now recognize as numbing. Numbing is the process of emotionally or psychologically detaching ourselves from distressing experiences. We numb our pain through countless ways: distractions, addictions, materialism, social media, and even through denial of deeper emotional needs. We watch endless hours of television, scroll through social media feeds, drink alcohol, or indulge in unhealthy habits, all in an effort to avoid the feelings that might arise. If we allowed ourselves to truly sit with discomfort, this numbing effect isn't just about escapism, it's a deep-seated desire to avoid the discomfort of facing something more profound. Perhaps it's the fear of confronting a painful truth about our lives, our relationships, or our society. Perhaps it's the fear of realizing that the life we've built is an illusion, one crafted from distractions and shallow pursuits rather than meaningful engagement with the world and ourselves. These avoidance behaviors are often reinforced by societal pressures that value pleasure and instant gratification over discomfort and introspection. But here's the catch: in avoiding pain, we also avoid growth. As much as we might wish to live in a world where we can control our experiences, free from suffering and discomfort, life does not function that way. The growth that comes from pain, the lessons learned from hardship, loss, failure, and disappointment are fundamental to the human condition. Without this pain, we remain static, we stagnate, we miss out on the opportunities to evolve into fuller, more complete versions of ourselves. Consider how society often encourages us to avoid difficult conversations. Whether it's about race, politics, or personal relationships, we are often told to avoid topics that might stir up discomfort. Don't talk about that, they say, as if the avoidance of uncomfortable subjects could make them go away. But this only perpetuates a culture of superficiality, one in which we avoid the real issues, never confronting the underlying problems that threaten our progress as individuals. And as a collective society, the fear of pain doesn't just manifest in emotional or intellectual avoidance. It also shows up in the physical realm. In today's world, we are constantly searching for quick fixes, painkillers, beauty treatments, technologies that promise to make our lives easier and more comfortable. We have become so obsessed with comfort that we have lost the ability to tolerate discomfort. And in doing so, we have forgotten that growth often happens precisely in those uncomfortable spaces. Take, for instance, the realm of physical fitness. The pain of a workout is not something we seek for its own sake, but rather for the growth it offers. The muscle soreness, the exertion, the effort, all of these are signs that we are pushing beyond our limits and, in doing so, strengthening our bodies. But if we were to avoid this pain, if we were to always choose the easy path, our bodies would remain weak and underdeveloped. The same principle applies to our emotional and psychological growth. Without confronting pain, we risk remaining emotionally stunted, unable to cope with the deeper challenges life throws at us. It's essential to recognize that avoiding pain can create a life of illusion, one where we live on the surface, pretending everything is fine, while the deeper, more profound aspects of existence are left untouched. The numbing, the distractions, the denial, they all work together to create a barrier between us and the fullness of our human experience. It's like walking through life with blinders on, never seeing the complexities of the world and ourselves in their true light. Ultimately, avoiding pain does not protect us from it. It merely delays the inevitable, and in the process, it steals from us the opportunity to engage in the most transformative experience we can have, the confrontation with our deepest fears, our greatest discomforts, and our most painful truths. It is through this confrontation that we can finally break free of the chains of avoidance and move toward a more authentic, meaningful existence. In the end, the question isn't whether we can avoid pain, it's whether we are willing to face it, to learn from it, and to use it as a tool for personal and collective transformation. Only then can we begin to move beyond the walls of avoidance and into a life that embraces the full spectrum of human experience, where both the light and the darkness are given their rightful place. Pain is inevitable, inescapable, and relentless. We all experience it. Yet, in our pursuit of comfort, we try everything in our power to avoid it. We suppress, deny, distract, or numb ourselves from its presence. This drive to escape pain, to flee from discomfort, seems to be deeply ingrained in human nature. But what happens when we choose avoidance over confrontation? What happens when we run from pain instead of facing it head-on a personal level? The avoidance of pain can feel like a temporary solution, a brief respite from the storm. Yet, this short-term relief often leads to long-term consequences that are far more destructive than the pain we sought to avoid in the first place. It's in the simple acts of ignoring your own inner turmoil, postponing that difficult conversation, or remaining in relationships that have long since stopped serving you. At first, the avoidance feels like self-preservation. After all, who would choose to confront pain willingly? But in the shadows of avoidance, something far more sinister begins to take shape. Consider, for example, a person trapped in an unhealthy relationship. At first, the discomfort of confronting their partner's toxic behavior seems unbearable. They might tell themselves that it's not that bad, that things will improve with time. So, they stay. They endure the passive-aggressive comments, the emotional neglect, the constant erosion of self-esteem. Days turn into months, and months turn into years. The pain they refuse to confront grows. insidiously creeping into every corner of their life. Eventually, it's not just the relationship that has affected their sense of self-worth, their trust in others, their ability to form meaningful connections. All of these become casualties in the wake of their decision to avoid pain. But what is the cost of this avoidance? It's not just the heartache or the emotional damage that piles up. It's the fundamental shift in how they see the world. Their reality becomes distorted. They've learned to tolerate abuse, to minimize their own needs. They've sacrificed their truth for the sake of peace, and now they live in a world that feels increasingly hollow. The longer they stay, the harder it becomes to break free, until they are too deep in the cycle of avoidance to even remember who they once were. Before the pain began, we could extend this idea to health. How many of us ignore the warning signs of our body crying out for help? The persistent headache, the sleepless nights, the weight gain, the increasing fatigue. Each symptom dismissed as a temporary inconvenience, something we'll deal with later. We push it aside, telling ourselves that there will be a better time, a more convenient time to face it. Yet, in doing so, we postpone the inevitable. And when the inevitable comes crashing down, whether it's a heart attack, diabetes, or some other chronic illness, it's often far worse than if we had listened to our body in the first place. This is the crux of the issue. The avoidance of pain only deepens the wound. We think we are protecting ourselves, but in reality, we are fostering the conditions for greater suffering in the future. Pain, when left unresolved, doesn't disappear. It festers, it twists, it grows into something more monstrous than we ever anticipated. But this dynamic isn't just personal. It plays out on a grander scale in society. As a collective, we are often faced with painful truths that we would rather not confront. Systemic inequalities, environmental degradation, the unsustainable trajectory of our political and economic systems. These are all uncomfortable realities that we know exist, yet we often choose to ignore them. Why? Because facing these issues would require sacrifice, change, and most importantly, pain. It's easier to turn a blind eye, to pretend that everything is fine, to keep going along with the status quo. But as with the personal decisions we make to avoid pain, the longer we ignore these societal wounds, the worse they get. The environmental crisis is a perfect example. For decades, we've known about the damage we are doing to our planet. We've known about the pollution, the deforestation, the melting ice caps. But instead of confronting these issues, we've avoided them. We've built industries that profit from environmental destruction and kept our heads buried in the sand, hoping it would all work itself out. Now, we are facing the consequences: rising sea levels, extreme weather events, ecosystems collapsing, and millions of people displaced from their homes. What once seemed like an abstract issue is now a very real and very painful reality. And this isn't just limited to the environment. Systemic inequality, racial, gender, economic is another glaring example. We've known for centuries that these disparities exist, yet time and time again, we've opted for complacency over confrontation. We've allowed injustice to fester, telling ourselves that the problems are too complex, too entrenched, too difficult to fix. We avoid the discomfort of acknowledging the depth of these issues, of questioning the structures that maintain them. But the result? A society fractured by resentment, division, and anger. As the wounds of inequality remain untreated, they continue to fester, leading to social unrest, civil conflict, and ultimately a collective breakdown. So, why do we avoid pain? Why do we insist on letting it grow instead of confronting it? In its earliest stages, it's because, on a fundamental level, we fear change. Pain is often a signal that something must change, whether it's in our relationships, our health, or our societal systems. And change is terrifying. It requires us to let go of our comfort, to step into the unknown, and to take responsibility for our own actions and their consequences. It's far easier to continue ignoring the signs, to convince ourselves that everything will be fine, rather than confronting the truth that change is necessary. But here's the paradox: the pain we avoid today is often the pain we must face tomorrow, only bigger, more destructive, and more difficult to manage. We can no longer afford to ignore the signals. Whether it's on a personal level or a societal one, we must learn to confront pain head-on, to grapple with the discomfort that comes with change, because the longer we avoid it, the more it festers, the more it grows, until it becomes something far worse than we ever imagined. The cost of avoiding pain is not just the suffering we experience later, it's the erosion of our ability to act, to create, and to evolve. It's the collapse of the systems we depend on, both within ourselves and in society at large. And ultimately, it's the death of hope as we find ourselves trapped in a cycle of avoidance, unable to escape the very pain we tried to outrun. In the end, the most painful truth we must confront is this: pain, in all its forms, is not something to avoid. It is something to embrace, to learn from, and to transform. Only then can we heal, both individually and collectively. Only then can we build a future that is not defined by the pain we refuse to face, but by the strength and wisdom that come from confronting it head-on. Pain, it's a word we instinctively recoil from. The mere thought of suffering, loss, or discomfort fills us with dread, urging us to seek refuge in anything that promises relief. But what if pain is not the enemy? What if it's the very key to unlocking a deeper, more authentic life? In this section, we will challenge the popular notion that pain is something to avoid at all costs, and instead, we will explore how embracing pain can lead to true freedom, a freedom that transcends mere survival or temporary pleasure. We will draw from two towering figures of philosophy and psychology, Friedrich Nietzsche and Carl Jung. Both saw pain as an integral part of the human experience, not a condition to escape from, but a force to confront, understand, and integrate. Let's begin by examining Nietzsche's radical idea of amor fati, the love of fate. Nietzsche, a philosopher notorious for his defiance of conventional morality and his critique of comfort, urged us to embrace our lives in their entirety, not only the moments of joy and triumph, but also the pain, suffering, and hardship. To truly love your fate, Nietzsche argued, is to accept everything that comes your way, without resistance, without resentment. But why? Why should we love the very things that cause us pain? Nietzsche believed that our modern society's obsession with comfort and avoidance of discomfort was robbing us of our potential. He saw how people tried to numb themselves with distractions, alcohol, work, entertainment, anything to avoid facing the existential realities of life. This avoidance, he argued, creates a hollow existence. Life becomes something you endure rather than something you live fully. The act of embracing pain, on the other hand, transforms it from a burden into a source of power. Imagine a life where you no longer resist the difficulties you face, but accept them as opportunities for growth. Every obstacle becomes a challenge to overcome, a lesson to be learned, a step in your journey towards self-overcoming. This is the essence of amor fati, not just tolerating pain, but loving it, seeing it as essential to the development of your character and strength. But embracing pain is not simply about stoically accepting suffering. It's about seeing pain as a transformative process. When Nietzsche speaks of embracing fate, he means that every painful experience has the potential to shape you into a stronger, more resilient version of yourself. It is through the struggle, through confronting our deepest fears and suffering, that we come to understand who we truly are. This is where Carl Jung's concept of individuation comes into play. Individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming your true self, involves confronting the parts of ourselves that we would rather avoid, the shadow, the unconscious forces that influence our thoughts and behaviors without us even realizing it. The shadow represents the aspects of ourselves that we suppress because they are uncomfortable, unpleasant, or socially unacceptable. These parts of us are often the source of our pain, and so, naturally, we want to avoid them. But Jung believed that avoiding the shadow only leads to inner fragmentation and suffering. To truly become whole, Jung argued, we must embrace the shadow. This means confronting the aspects of ourselves that cause us pain, the parts of us that we fear or despise. It is only by acknowledging these parts and integrating them into our conscious self that we can achieve psychological wholeness. This is the core of what Jung called the individuation process. Individuation is not about becoming perfect or escaping pain. It's about becoming fully yourself. It's about accepting all parts of your being, including the painful and difficult ones, and integrating them into a cohesive whole. When we resist or repress these parts, they only gain power over us, often manifesting as anxiety, depression, or destructive behavior. But when we embrace them, we gain access to deeper layers of our psyche, unlocking hidden strengths and wisdom. Both Nietzsche and Jung offer us profound insights into how we can transform pain into a path toward self-realization and freedom. Pain, when faced head-on, becomes a teacher. It forces us to confront our limitations, to question our assumptions, and to break free from the chains of comfort and mediocrity. It compels us to grow, to evolve, and to become something greater than we were before. But how do we practically apply this idea in our own lives? How do we begin to embrace pain rather than shy away from it? It's easier said than done. Of course, in a world that constantly tells us to seek pleasure and avoid discomfort, taking on pain with open arms can feel counterintuitive, even radical. One practical strategy is mindfulness meditation. Meditation doesn't just teach us to clear our minds or relax. It also teaches us to sit with discomfort. In the silence of meditation, we may encounter feelings of restlessness, frustration, or anxiety. Instead of rushing to push these feelings away, mindfulness asks us to sit with them, observe them, and learn from them. Through this practice, we begin to train ourselves to be present with our pain. Rather than running from it, we learn that pain is not something to be feared, but something to be understood. Another strategy is therapy, particularly approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy (CBT) or dialectical behavior therapy (DBT). These therapeutic methods don't promise to eliminate pain, but they equip us with the tools to deal with it more effectively. CBT helps us challenge the negative thought patterns that arise in response to pain, teaching us how to reframe our experiences and find meaning in suffering. DBT encourages us to accept the reality of pain without judgment, teaching us to tolerate distress without resorting to harmful coping mechanisms. Finally, there's the process of confronting uncomfortable truths in our everyday lives. We all carry around hidden fears, unresolved conflicts, and uncomfortable truths that we'd rather not face. These are often the sources of our pain, and yet we continue to avoid them, hoping that they'll disappear on their own. But they never do. Instead, they linger, festering beneath the surface, affecting our decisions, relationships, and well-being. To truly embrace pain, we must confront these truths. This might mean having difficult conversations with loved ones, addressing unresolved issues in our work or personal life, or facing the aspects of ourselves we've long neglected. It's not easy, but it is necessary. Only by confronting these painful truths can we begin to heal and grow. The path to freedom, then, is not the path of avoidance. It is the path of confrontation, integration, and transformation. It is about embracing pain as an essential part of the human experience. By doing so, we don't just survive, we thrive. We become more authentic, more whole, and more powerful. In the end, the freedom that Nietzsche and Jung speak of is not freedom from pain. It is the freedom to live fully, to embrace all that life offers, both the light and the dark. It is the freedom to face the world as it is, without fear or denial, and to emerge stronger, wiser, and more complete. So, the next time pain comes knocking at your door, don't turn away. Don't run from it. Welcome it as a messenger, a teacher, and a guide. Embrace it, for in doing so, you might just discover the truest form of freedom there is, the freedom to be fully, unapologetically, and powerfully yourself. In today's world, the aversion to pain has become more than just a personal struggle. It has woven itself into the very fabric of society. We see it everywhere, in politics, on social media, and even in our personal relationships. There's an overwhelming obsession with pleasure, comfort, and avoiding discomfort at all costs. But what does this avoidance really cost us? How does it shape our interactions and decisions? And, perhaps most importantly, how does it contribute to the fragmentation of our society? The rise of cancel culture is one of the most striking examples of this phenomenon. At its core, cancel culture is about silencing discomfort. It thrives on the premise that certain ideas, actions, or individuals are too painful to acknowledge. so we must erase them entirely from the public discourse. But in doing so, we don't just erase uncomfortable truths, we also erase the opportunity for growth, understanding, and reconciliation. When we cancel someone, we avoid the painful task of confronting complex issues. Instead of engaging in a difficult conversation, we choose the easier path of condemnation and exclusion. It's easier, of course, because it provides immediate relief from the discomfort of disagreement. But this relief comes at a steep price. It isolates us from each other. We no longer have to reckon with ideas we find painful or challenging. Instead, we build walls around ourselves, surrounded only by people who think the way we do, and in doing so, we lose the ability to engage in meaningful dialogue. This aversion to pain isn't confined to cancel culture. It manifests in the way we engage with politics today. Politics, at its core, is about navigating conflict, confronting uncomfortable truths, and making difficult decisions. But more and more, we see political discourse reduced to sound bites and simplistic narratives. It's about winning, not understanding. It's about avoiding the discomfort of complexity and nuance in favor of a clean, easily digestible position. In a world of ideological extremes, we've lost the middle ground, the space where we can discuss, debate, and disagree with respect. Instead of grappling with the painful reality that people can hold different beliefs, we retreat into echo chambers where our views are never challenged. The discomfort of encountering opposing viewpoints is too great, so we choose the false comfort of ideological purity. We see it every day: the loud voices on social media, the clickbait headlines, the viral content that thrives on outrage. It's all designed to avoid the pain of real, human connection. But the avoidance of pain doesn't just affect our political and social lives. It also shapes our personal relationships. In a world where vulnerability is often seen as a weakness, we are increasingly afraid of emotional pain. We avoid difficult conversations with our loved ones, choosing instead to keep things superficial and safe. The result? A society where real intimacy is scarce, where we hide behind masks of perfection, and where we settle for shallow connections that never challenge or grow us. It's worth considering what we lose when we choose this path. When we avoid pain, we also avoid growth. The most transformative moments in our lives, the ones that shape us, that change us, that teach us to be better, are often born from the discomfort of confrontation, of loss, of struggle. But when we reject pain, we reject the very experiences that would lead us toward deeper understanding and connection. This tendency to avoid pain also has a darker side. The increasing polarization of society is one of its most dangerous consequences. In a culture that fears discomfort, it's easier to demonize the other side than to engage with them. We retreat into our ideological silos, where everything is black and white, and the pain of ambiguity is unbearable. This fragmentation weakens the social fabric, turning us against each other, not because we're fundamentally different, but because we've become allergic to the discomfort of having to understand one another. This is not just a social trend, it's a psychological phenomenon. We've built a society that rewards the avoidance of discomfort and punishes those who dare to confront it. Our media, our politics, and even our personal interactions are shaped by this fear, and as a result, we are losing the ability to face the complexities of the human experience. The painful truths that we refuse to acknowledge continue to fester beneath the surface, fueling division, resentment, and a profound sense of alienation. What we fail to understand is that in avoiding pain, we are avoiding the very thing that could set us free, the ability to confront the harsh realities of life and emerge stronger for it. Pain, though difficult, is not the enemy. It is the key to transformation. It is through pain that we learn, adapt, and grow. But when we turn away from it, we deny ourselves the chance to evolve. The modern world has made it easy to escape discomfort. With the click of a button, we can mute voices we disagree with. We can unfollow those who challenge us, and we can surround ourselves with a bubble of affirmation. But this ease comes with a cost to our personal development, our societal cohesion, and our ability to understand one another. We must ask ourselves, what are we willing to sacrifice for the sake of avoiding pain? Is the comfort of the status quo worth the price of stagnation? Are we prepared to face the discomfort that comes with truth, with growth, and with real connection? Or will we continue to hide behind the illusion of safety, only to find ourselves more divided, more isolated, and less human than ever before? The consequences of avoiding pain in contemporary society are profound and far-reaching, from cancel culture to the rise of political extremism to the erosion of genuine human connection. The refusal to confront discomfort is shaping our world in ways we may not fully understand yet. But one thing is certain: if we continue down this path, we risk losing not only our ability to engage with one another meaningfully, but also our capacity for true growth and transformation. And in the end, the avoidance of pain may be the very thing that leads to our downfall. At the very core of who we are lies a part of us that we choose to ignore. It lurks in the depths of our psyche, invisible to the conscious mind but ever present, in our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. This part of ourselves, the shadow, is often the most uncomfortable, the most disowned. It encompasses the pain we avoid, the fears we refuse to face, and the traumas we desperately try to forget. But here's the thing about shadows: no matter how hard we try to outrun them, they are always there, silently pulling the strings behind the scenes. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, introduced the concept of the shadow to explain the unconscious parts of the self that we reject. For Jung, the shadow was not inherently negative. It wasn't just about our darker traits, but about all the aspects of ourselves that we deny, the qualities that, for one reason or another, don't fit into our idealized image of who we think we should be. These can be feelings of rage, insecurity, jealousy, or even desires that contradict our outward persona. The shadow is not just an individual concept, but a collective one. 2. Societies have shadows just as individuals do: historical atrocities, unspoken prejudices, and repressed memories that shape cultural identities and political landscapes. The idea that the shadow is a necessary part of the human experience is unsettling. It forces us to confront the parts of ourselves that we have spent a lifetime running from. And yet, this confrontation is exactly what holds the key to our psychological and emotional healing. To truly understand why we sabotage ourselves, why we lash out in anger at those we love, or why societies plunge into conflict time and time again, we must first understand the nature of avoidance and the role the shadow plays in it. The shadow manifests in subtle and often destructive ways. When we suppress or deny our pain, fear, or anger, these emotions don't simply disappear. Instead, they take on a life of their own, often resurfacing in unexpected and damaging forms. Perhaps it's the quiet voice inside us urging us to procrastinate on a project, or the sudden emotional outbursts that seem disproportionate to the situation. At its most extreme, this avoidance can lead to self-sabotage, a cycle where we unknowingly undermine our own success, happiness, or relationships because we're unwilling to face the underlying emotions that drive our behavior. Take, for example, the case of an individual who has experienced deep childhood trauma. The memory of this trauma might be buried in the unconscious, but the effects are not. As they move through life, they may find themselves in toxic relationships. Unable to escape the pattern of self-destructive choices, they might lash out at those who try to help, rejecting love or support because deep down, they believe they are unworthy of it. Their shadow is not the trauma itself, but the denial of it, the refusal to acknowledge the pain that still haunts them. This refusal, over time, turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy, where their unconscious mind seeks out situations that reaffirm the narrative they have constructed to protect themselves from the truth. On a larger scale, societies, too, avoid their shadows. History is littered with examples of collective denial, where nations and cultures suppress uncomfortable truths. We see this in the aftermath of wars, in the denial of systemic injustices, and in the unacknowledged wounds that shape entire generations. After the Second World War, for example, many European nations struggled to confront the full scope of the horrors they had either witnessed or participated in. The shadow of war, of complicity, of violence was hidden beneath layers of political rhetoric and national pride. It wasn't until years later, through painstaking efforts to confront these uncomfortable truths, that some measure of healing could begin to take place. Even today, we see the shadow manifesting in our collective consciousness. Political polarization, racial tensions, and global conflicts can often be traced back to an unwillingness to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our societies. When we avoid acknowledging our shadow, it doesn't simply fade away. It festers, it grows stronger and more demanding, pushing us toward destructive behavior. This is evident in the way societies handle systemic oppression, environmental destruction, and economic inequality by pretending they don't exist or by rationalizing them as inevitable consequences of progress. These shadows, when ignored, lead to larger-scale aggression and conflict as societies fight not just each other, but their own suppressed truths. But here lies the paradox. The very act of avoiding the shadow is what ensures its dominance. It's as though the shadow grows stronger the more we try to escape it. When we confront it, however, something transformative occurs. This is where the true power of integration lies. Integrating the shadow is not about eradicating it, but about acknowledging it, understanding it, and finding a way to coexist with it. It's about recognizing that the shadow is not an enemy to be defeated, but a part of us to be embraced. Only then can we stop projecting our darkness onto others, both as individuals and as societies. Real-life examples of shadow integration are rare, but they are powerful when they do occur. One such case is the story of Nelson Mandela, whose personal transformation was deeply rooted in his ability to face the painful history of apartheid and the anger it created within him. Mandela's capacity to confront the darkness of his own feelings and of his nation's history allowed him to shift from a stance of revenge and division to one of reconciliation and unity. It was only through embracing his personal shadow and the collective shadow of South Africa that he could lead his country toward healing and transformation. For individuals, the process of integrating the shadow is often much more personal, less visible to the outside world, but it is no less profound. It begins with the willingness to face the emotions we fear, the pain we've buried, and the parts of ourselves we've rejected. The first step is acknowledging that these aspects exist. The second is understanding their origin and purpose. Why do we harbor resentment? What is the root of our fear? What traumas continue to haunt us? And how do they shape our behaviors? Only by confronting these uncomfortable questions can we begin the process of healing. As we face the darkness within, we begin to see it not as a flaw, but as an integral part of the human experience. The shadow, when integrated, brings clarity. It sharpens our understanding of who we are, of what we've been through, and of what we're capable of. In doing so, it allows us to become whole. And when we become whole, we stop projecting our darkness onto the world around us. Instead, we transform it, we make peace with it, and in doing so, we are able to bring about real change both in ourselves and in the world. The shadow of avoidance is one of the most powerful forces in human life. It is the silent architect of our pain, the hidden driver behind our most destructive behaviors, but it is also the key to our liberation. For it is only by facing the shadow that we can truly understand ourselves, our societies, and the forces that shape our lives. In this confrontation lies the transformative potential of human existence. Only when we stop avoiding the shadow can we truly begin to heal and, in turn, begin to heal the world. Throughout this journey, we have ventured deep into the human psyche, tracing the contours of pain, its role in shaping power, and its inevitable link to freedom, from Nietzsche's call to embrace suffering, to the shadow that lurks in the unconscious mind, to the societal forces that push us toward avoidance and comfort. We have explored the idea that pain is not just an obstacle, but a vital force of transformation. The pain we evade today is not only shaping our fate, it is defining the very structure of our lives. But the question remains, how do we break free from this vicious cycle? How do we reclaim the power that has been slipping through our fingers, hidden beneath layers of avoidance, denial, and suppression? The answer, though paradoxical, is simple. We must confront the pain we have so long tried to escape. We live in a society that markets comfort as the highest good, that praises ease and convenience, offering quick fixes to avoid emotional discomfort. But in doing so, we diminish ourselves every moment we seek to avoid pain. We also forsake an opportunity for growth. Every time we push away the discomfort of facing our truths, we lock ourselves further into a cage of passivity, where our choices are dictated not by our own will, but by the forces that seek to control our every move. It is in the confrontation with pain that we find the key to true freedom. It is through the willingness to sit with our discomforts, whether they are emotional, physical, or existential, that we unlock the potential to reshape our lives. This is the lesson that Nietzsche imparts. Life is not a static, comfortable existence, but a continuous battle with forces both external and internal. The pain we face, if we dare to confront it, becomes the crucible in which we forge our power, our identity, and our meaning. But why is this so difficult? Why do we shy away from pain, even when we know, deep down, that it is the only path to growth? The answer lies in our deepest fears: the fear of failure, the fear of suffering, the fear of losing control. These fears are not just personal anxieties. They are woven into the very fabric of our societal structures. The culture of avoidance has been designed to protect us from discomfort, to keep us in a state of perpetual numbness, where we can continue to function without ever questioning the deeper currents of our existence. In this environment, pain is something to be avoided at all costs, and any form of suffering is seen as a weakness. Yet, this avoidance does not shield us from the consequences of our pain. In fact, it makes the consequences far worse. The pain that we fail to confront in our lives does not disappear, it festers. It accumulates, and it waits for us. When we refuse to face it head-on, it grows in strength, often manifesting in subtle yet destructive ways: in addiction, in toxic relationships, in depression, in the numbing of our potential. This is where the power of the shadow, as Carl Jung described, comes into play. The parts of ourselves we reject, the aspects of our personality or experience that we deem unacceptable, do not vanish. They go underground, into the unconscious, only to resurface in more insidious forms. To reclaim our power, we must bring these repressed parts into the light, confront them, and integrate them into our conscious selves. We must stop running from the parts of ourselves that we find uncomfortable, and instead embrace them as integral pieces of our wholeness. Consider the moments in your life where you felt most alive, those moments of intense struggle, where you faced adversity head-on. In those moments, you may have felt overwhelmed, but you also likely felt a deep sense of fulfillment, of purpose. Why? Because in those moments, you were tapping into something much deeper than the surface-level comforts of everyday existence. You were engaging with the very essence of what it means to be human, the capacity to endure, to grow, and to transcend. This is not just a personal journey, but a societal one as well. As a culture, we must stop glorifying the avoidance of discomfort and start embracing the transformative potential of pain. This requires a fundamental shift in how we view suffering, not as something to be feared and avoided, but as something to be understood, processed, and ultimately used as fuel for personal and collective growth. It is through our collective willingness to face our pain, as individuals and as a society, that we can begin to reclaim true power. Power is not about control over others or the manipulation of external circumstances. It is about the mastery of self, the ability to navigate the complexities of our own minds and emotions, and to emerge stronger and more whole. And so, the ultimate challenge and the ultimate invitation is clear: confront the pain you have been avoiding. Seek out the discomforts you have been running from. Look directly into the darkness of your own psyche, and in doing so, illuminate the path to freedom. For it is in the very spaces we fear to tread that we will discover the power to change, to evolve, and to shape our own fate. You are not the sum of your fears, your weaknesses, or your scars. You are the embodiment of your capacity to confront the pain and emerge from it as something greater. Do not let the pain you avoid become the chains that bind you to a life of quiet desperation. Choose instead to face it, to harness it, and to transform it into the source of your deepest strength. This is the way to power. This is the way to freedom. This is the way to reclaim your fate.